This in the north, Sergeant Mack was assigned to an Army Special Forces ground team in South and Central Iraq, and he traveled with them across the country, was one of the first into Baghdad International Airport, and he took weather observations at the airport, forwarding them to the weather teams outside the country via radio or cell phone, so that other weather forecasters had an idea what was being observed in the theater of operations. As you can imagine, when combat operations in a hostile country kicks off, it's not likely that the civilian weather service, what remains of it, is going to worry about transmitting weather observations. So having people in the country taking observations is important. December 2010, back to Afghanistan. A major snowstorm moved across western border of Afghanistan and Iran. A U.S. Army helicopter was accomplishing a routine flight through the passes of central Afghanistan. It was fired upon by insurgents, and after receiving damage, this helicopter had to land hard in a valley in the Bamiyan province west of Bagram, and it was resulting in injuries. So we had a downed aircraft. We had probably half a dozen, 10 or 12 military personnel, some injured, and they're stuck out there in bad guy country. And so two F-16 fighters were scrambled to provide armed overwatch. Of course, these fighters had to receive a weather briefing before they flew. They got to know what's coming down. And what was briefed to them was an impending snowstorm, a significant snowstorm that was going to hamper operations. So you can imagine a snowstorm's coming, you got good guys hurt on the ground, and you got to get them out. And a weather guy's got to communicate that to them and say, hey, look, you got to get them out now or they're not coming out. And that's exactly what they did. They briefed that to the commanders. They scrambled a quick mission, and some UH-60 medevac helicopters took off and were able to pull them out before the snowstorm hit and shut the aviation down. Just again, another small example of how important weather is to the military flyers. And then there's so much more. It's not just about the battlefield. There's hurricanes, there's volcanoes. When St. Helens erupted, the Air Force Weather Agency produced ash forecasts. In fact, even today, they have a system that monitors volcanic activity. And anytime there's a plume or a cloud, they produce a point forecast for that cloud, that ash product, because as you know, there's military aircraft flying constantly everywhere, all around the world, and you don't want to fly one of these things through an ash cloud. It does tremendous amounts of damage to the jet engines, and so they monitor that. Obviously, floods. Anytime there's a flooding event, that's a weather-caused scenario, and so when that happens, commanders start asking, okay, how long, how much, how many, and things of that nature. And he relies on his weather guy to give him that information. You heard about Haiti. That's decidedly not a weather event. The earthquake that impacted that country. However, it took down their airport. Their civilian airport was offline for a lengthy period of time, and we sent a team down. The 123rd Weather Flight, led by Lieutenant Gibson, went down there, and they started taking observations at the airport. They helped them get it operational again. They figured out what they needed in parts and tried to coordinate the logistics part to get the weather sensing equipment at that international. This is an international airport, and flights cannot go in and out of an international airport without a viable weather observation. And our team went in there and helped to provide that service for them. Even though it's not a weather event, but it certainly was impacted by weather. Storms continued to roll through there. They'd had rain. It would impact, there's guys down the ground, they're living in tents. Next thing you know, there's a river running right in between their cots because it's raining so much. These are the kind of things that a military commander is going to want to know that's going to impact them. Pakistan flooding in August of 2010, the 19th Expeditionary Weather Squadron, they're stationed in Afghanistan. They're conducting combat operations against the Taliban, against Al-Qaeda. And Pakistan receives a record amount of rain that put 2/3 of their land area underwater. And so they deployed a team in parts of Pakistan to include aviation. And of course, aviation's flying, they gotta have weather because they know if they go in blind, they'll wind up either stuck or damaged. And so they took a weather team with them to help support the aviation, the humanitarian missions that were flying in and out of there. So it's not, being a military weather guy, it's not just about combat. There's so much more than that, and it's a mission we bring to the country when we have to go somewhere like Haiti, or to respond to tsunami events like in Japan. All those things require weather intelligence to help the military conduct its operations in a safe and effective way. And let's not forget about space. Space, of course, there's a huge impact of weather in space, ranging from rocket launches, which are extremely weather sensitive. They can't just launch at any time they want. There has to be a very specific window of opportunity, and frequently that was governed by the weather. Shuttle support. The shuttle did not launch unless there was an Air Force weather guy at Patrick Air Force Base giving the thumbs up or the thumbs down. How much responsibility is that as a weather guy to say, no, there's clouds, and we're not talking bad weather, and this is the nuances of weather. People think, well, it's not that bad, but the shuttle, it's not going to launch if there's any kind of clouds at, I'll just pick something, 25 to 30,000 feet. If there's, and that's not something that the National Weather Service or other folks are typically worried about. They're worried about getting, commercial airliners landing, not some high-tech piece of space equipment like the shuttle. So a tremendous amount of responsibility. Solar as well is a huge thing now with the GPS, satellite communications, everything in orbit around the Earth is hugely impacted by what's called solar weather. And there is a team of Air Force weather specialists whose job it is to monitor the sun and to observe any solar impacts into what that space weather could have on operations. And finally, I can't conclude by telling the story of Captain Nylander. Captain Nylander became the first Air Force weather casualty of the war in Afghanistan. And he was deployed to Afghanistan as an advisor and member of the NATO Air Training Command Afghanistan of the 438th Air Expeditionary Wing. He was just a weather guy. He was there to help them understand the role weather was impacting their operations. And as he was in a particular meeting on the air base involving some interacting with some Afghan military members, one of the Afghanis started to open fire, and Captain Nylander evacuated the conference room he occupied with 4 other airmen and 8 Afghan personnel. He then proceeded out into the hall where he and another officer engaged and wounded the gunman. Believing the attacker was incapacitated, Captain Nylander began again to assist the wounded. Upon realizing the enemy was still active, the bad guy got up again. He re-engaged the gunman, and at that time then was wounded in the ensuing battle, and he lost his life. Captain Nylander posthumously received the Silver Star Medal for his valor. Air Force Chief of Staff General Morton Schwartz presented the Silver Star to his widow and 3 children during a ceremony at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona. He was one of our own out of the 25th OWS. Saying, "Our nation was blessed with such a brave and generous airman," he told the children, "You need to know how proud we are of your father." And the lesson there was, that could have been me. It could have been any of these weather guys. So we're not kicking in doors. We're not charging up the hill to take the readouts. We're there to supply the information, the intelligence to the guys that do. But that doesn't mean that our weather warriors are not in harm's way. And Captain Nylander paid the price in the ultimate sense. So it's just a poignant reminder that we are called Combat Air Force, Combat Weathermen for a reason. Finally, there's an argument. A lot of people say, well, you know, they look at us and say, well, gee, you're just doing what the National Weather Service does. I mean, why can't we just pull the forecasts off the internet? You know, I go to weather.com, I can find what I need. It's like, well, that's great if you're going to go golfing, or if you're trying to figure out whether to put put a coat on your kid in the morning, or anything like that. And as an example, this was the National Weather Service forecast for Fort Drum, U.S. Army Airfield in New York for this weekend. And if you haven't been paying any attention at all, they're having a heck of a snowstorm up there this weekend. And so this is a forecast, and if I were to throw that up to my Army commander and show these nice pictures of snowflakes and snow and temperature things, you know, he'd promptly throw me out of the briefing room and say, go try again. Because this is not going to help him out, because he's going to ask questions like, when is the snow going to start? When is it going to end? He's going to say, how much snow? He says, why do I care? Will my aircraft be able to fly? Will they be able to land? If there's bad guys out there, not Fort Drum, but in a combat sense, if there are bad guys out there, will I be able to find them? Will my tracked vehicles be affected? You know, are my tanks going to get stuck, or are they going to be okay? What about satellite or communications? How are these going to be impacted? You're not going to get any of that from that Weather Service forecast. In fact, I found this. This is the equivalent forecast for Fort Drum from a military weather forecaster. And this is what the Army likes to see, or the Air Force. They like to see, what does this mean to me? They're sure they'll still see pretty icons. They are the Army after all, so they like to see the pictures. But we've codified the weather into this stoplight chart, so the reds and yellows and greens, and we put it on a timeline, you know, from in time out to the future, and we say red is a no-go, yellow is marginal, green you're okay. We've got information like sunrise and sunset. We'll put information, wind speed and direction, for how long, and gusts, and ceiling and visibility, and temperature, because that affects whether, you know, how much gear are my troops going to have to carry to stay warm and to keep from freezing, and those kind of things. So that's an example of what value a military forecaster gives to his commander. Much more detailed, much more specific, because the job of our weather forecasters is not so much, can you go out and determine what the height of the ceiling is? Can you see, how far can you see? You know, that kind of information is like you said, it's easy to get off the internet. I can get the current observations from the airfield weather sensor right out here. But the main transition that's happened over the last 60 years, so back to history again, you know, nearly 60 years, the tools of weather was, you know, electromechanical. There were analog sensing display systems, teletype bulletins, manually plotted maps, analyzed with acetates and grease pencils. And commanders received their weather mission forecasts from staff weather personnel, largely based on the 4 times a day synoptic cycle of the meteorological community. But nowadays, weather warriors are using 3rd generation microprocessor-based integrated processing, computerized network communications, allowing commanders to receive highly tailored products any time of the day relevant to their mission area responsibility. Our job now is not to key punch in a terminal aerodrome forecast. It's not to, you know, record and observe the weather. We've got technology that can do that pretty good. Pretty good. It's not perfect, but our job now is to take a forecast that might look like this and answer to the Army commander or the air commander, who's going to say, basically say, he's going to look at this and say, so what? So what? Okay, it's going to snow. It snows in New York. So what? Well, sir, you know, your vehicles are going to be buried and you're going to have to dig them out. Oh, yeah, I guess I better put snow plows on, right? Yes, you better put snow plows on, sir. What else do I need to know? Well, you know, the mud, the dirt roads out in the training area or out in the area of operation, it's going to be 6 inches deep in mud and slush. It's like you're not going to be able to go through there. Oh, so we better go find an alternate route then, huh? Yes, sir, you better find an alternate route. Okay. Oh, and by the way, those UAVs, the unmanned vehicles that you're counting on for intelligence, they're not going to be able to fly. Oh, so we won't be able to see the bad guys over the hill. No, sir, you won't be able to see the bad guys over the hill. So we better come up with an alternate plan then. Yes, sir, better come up with an alternate plan. So that's the kind of thing that a military weather guy has to do. He takes this and turns it into a decision aid that somebody can make that will increase the effectiveness of the mission and save lives, make sure that his resources are protected. So that's all I have. I think I've taken up a fair amount of time.